I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close Up. This week, is congestion pricing dead? We'll talk with Manhattan Institute senior fellow Nicole Gelinas about Governor Hochul's decision to suspend the tolls and the impact of her decision. But first, calling the decision a disastrously wrong turn taken by the governor, City Controller Brad Lander announced this week that his office will be exploring all legal avenues to get congestion pricing in the city back on track. New York Times Metro reporters Dana Rubenstein and Stefanos Chen bring us up to date. Stefanos, the governor said that the reason for postponing it, delaying it, putting on hold, whatever we call it, is that it would hurt the city's economy, the economy coming out of the pandemic still, hurt by the influx of migrants. What is the state of the city's economy, and is it so precarious that congestion pricing implemented on June 30th as scheduled would really hurt it?
I think what the governor is arguing is an argument that it is currently popular. The fact that congestion pricing was unpopular with most New Yorkers in recent polling, and that there are some measures that show that the city has not fully recovered from the pandemic by a lot of metrics we can talk about. But there are a growing group of advocates, both environmental, transportation, good governance groups, that believe that these are separate problems. Yes, the economy is not fully recovered, but that congestion pricing was not going to make it worse. And in fact, we need congestion pricing to fund the MTA, which is vital to the city's economy.
Wouldn't funding mass transit, making mass transit better, make the economy of the city better? Maybe not immediately, but ultimately.
That is the argument mostly, that you have close to 5 million users of not just the subways, but also metro rails, buses, and that this is sort of the life force of the city, that most New Yorkers who commute into the city are commuting by subway or by other means. And that as this system falls apart, I mean, we have some signals that are over 100 years old. We have things on the docket that have been put off for decades, that if this goes on much longer, that is going to be a more immediate negative impact on the economy.
And how did the governor make the argument that this would hurt the economy of the city?
I think,
although she never said that all along and just made this decision 3 weeks before it was supposed to take effect.
Well, I'm sure there are also political calculations there, but I think...
Oh, what a cynic.
But in terms of the economy, there's a strong argument to be made from that perspective as well. People feel that the economy has not recovered in their lives. The median income of folks in New York City is down 7% from 19 to 22. The fact that inflation is still very high, and people feel that in a very tangible way when they go to the grocery or the gas pump. And so folks feel as though this is a burden that they can't take on today. But there is also these other more future-looking perspectives that if you don't fix this problem with the MTA and its big budget hole, then we'll have larger issues down the line.
And arguably, if you imposed congestion pricing, more people might work from home and Manhattan office space might empty out even more.
That is the argument, that currently Broadway is not fully back, although they're close. You have tourism is not quite back. The offices, it's sort of plateaued in the sense of the hybrid work week. Most folks are mixing it up, which is bad for local businesses on the ground. But again, the argument there is that those things are not going to be affected by congestion pricing. Congestion itself, traffic, is a huge drain on the economy, and that I think the advocates for congestion pricing would say that there are these underappreciated benefits of actually reducing gridlock in the city, something to the tune of over $9 billion by one group's estimate per year could be saved because of the time we lose in commuting.
Dana, why did the governor change her mind, and why at the last minute like that when she really gave no inkling of that earlier?
Right, well, there's a dissonance between what she was saying privately to people and what she was saying publicly, and I think that dissonance has caused her a lot of problems.
So we shouldn't believe what she says publicly?
For months, quietly, she was expressing concerns about congestion pricing. She was meeting with some real estate folks who were expressing concerns about the state of the commercial real estate market in the Central Business District. you know, she just had doubts, and obviously the polling also gave her pause. You know, congestion pricing is not popular. However, as almost anyone will tell you who's looked into the issue, prior to congestion pricing being launched in other global cities, they have what's called like a polling valley of death, where the public sentiment around congestion pricing hits a nadir, and then congestion pricing is implemented, and people look around and they like what they see, they get used to it, and the public sentiment improves. But the truth is that we're 5 months ahead of a pivotal general election that could determine the fate of the country by some measures. You know, she's got her own reelection coming up soon, and so I think she put the polling together with whatever pressure she may or may not have been getting from national Democrats. And the other factor, I think, is that there are 8 lawsuits against congestion pricing, and it's possible she was waiting for some other off-ramp to materialize. But when June rolled around and, you know, we were less than 4 weeks away from congestion pricing's launch, I think she felt that she had no choice but to make a move. But I'm not sure that she anticipated the enormous blowback that's ensued, or the truly huge practical complications that have been created for the MTA.
And of course, politically, it's also likely to have an impact, we're not sure exactly which way, in the suburbs on congressional and legislative races, which she hopes will now be positive because of ending or postponing congestion pricing.
Yeah, maybe she hopes that she'll be vindicated. But, you know, it's really hard to say at this time.
Stefanos, what's the impact on the MTA now? The MTA expecting, whether it got it or not, $1 billion a year to fix mass transit. What happens now?
I think what more importantly, yes, $1 billion a year, but this was money mandated by a 2019 law that specifically said this $1 billion will help bond and support $15 billion of funding that the MTA is already relying on. So canceling or postponing congestion pricing so close to the start of it really created a scramble, because there aren't any viable options on the table currently to replace that money. And we saw that scramble in the last days of the legislative session, in which they were trying to figure out, well, what do we, if we don't have $1 billion to plug in this way, how else do we do it? This plan took years to put together, and so they weren't going to do it in 3 days. And so that we're still sort of in kind of a limbo there.
And what are the options, Dana, for the MTA? The MTA, supposedly an independent body, although arguably politically controlled by the governor. Can they say, we're going to do this anyway, or has the governor really got control?
The governor, as you know, effectively controls the MTA. I think she has argued, her team has argued, that MTA board approval is not necessary because this isn't a cancellation of congestion pricing, it's an indefinite pause. Opponents, including attorneys who are working with Brad Lander, argue that an indefinite pause is tantamount to a cancellation, and that she lacks the legal authority to move ahead with a cancellation. You know, it's unclear what the MTA board itself will do. Obviously, there are many members on the board who are quite upset about this, but I'm sure there are also many members who will go along.
So does it look like there's any legal grounds to force the governor's hand on this?
Michael Gerard, who is a very prominent environmental lawyer, is sort of spearheading this team of other attorneys who are looking and exploring various avenues of litigation. They believe that her move might have violated the 2019 law that Stefanos mentioned that mandated that the MTA shall implement congestion pricing. They think it might also violate the state's environmental law, which mandates a certain reduction in emissions statewide. They think it might violate the Americans with Disabilities Act, because much of that $15 billion capital plan was to go to make our famously inaccessible subway system more accessible to people in wheelchairs. So yeah, they think there are various avenues of potential litigation.
Stefanos, who would congestion pricing have affected in New York in terms of income, people of income? Would it be poor people, middle-class people? Obviously not rich people, particularly, certainly not as a percentage of their income if they use mass transit at all.
Well, I think that was one of the strongest arguments that opponents of congestion pricing had. But if you look at some of the data that's been amassed looking at what happened with congestion pricing, typically it's a very small percentage of people in poverty or even lower to middle income folks who would have to pay that $15 regularly.
Why is that?
Most don't drive into the city for work. When you look at folks who are by definition in poverty, so that's like a family of four under $30-something thousand, or an individual who is about $15,000 a year, that kind of person is not driving into the city. They are taking mass transit, they're biking, they may not come into Manhattan at all if they're in one of the outer boroughs. And so it's a pretty fractional share of commuters or workers in New York who would have been dinged by that. I think some of the more prominent groups that were opposing it were folks like the truckers associations, who would argue that they would be dinged every time they'd come in and out of the zone. But they make up a small fraction of the traffic on the roads. And so
Would that cost be passed on to consumers, though?
the argument there was, and that was part of one of these 8 lawsuits that Dana mentioned, was these truckers saying that we're going to have to pass on the cost that we're incurring to the businesses, and the businesses are going to pass it on to consumers. Now, whether or not that shakes out is unclear, but there are other cities that have implemented this, like London and Singapore, and there's no quantifiable research there as to how much prices went up because of congestion pricing.
Thanks to Dana Rubenstein, Stefanos Chen of the New York Times for joining us. And coming up next, how important is congestion pricing for New York? Set to begin in just a few short weeks, New York's congestion pricing plan was finally to become the first such congestion pricing plan in a major U.S. city. Its dual goal to reduce traffic congestion while generating billions of dollars for mass transit. But it all came to a screeching halt last week when Governor Hochul surprisingly announced she was taking the much-anticipated plan offline. Here to discuss what the city stands to lose, to elaborate on her Times opinion essay, Manhattan Institute senior fellow Nicole Gelinas. She's also the author of the forthcoming book, Movement, New York's Long War to Take Back Its Streets from the Car. Thank you for joining us, Nicole. Now, you said in the Times piece that the state was trying to do the right thing in the wrong way. What did you mean by that?
Thank you, Sam. Well, congestion pricing is starting to be like when you sit down to watch Romeo and Juliet or Titanic. You have high hopes for the characters, but you know in the back of your head exactly how it's going to end every time. And the city and the state of New York have been trying to implement some form of congestion pricing now for more than half of a century. This is finally the closest that we ever came to implementing it before the governor, 3.5 weeks out, decided to call what she calls a pause on the program. And this is, New Yorkers are exhausted now by the idea of congestion pricing, and you can't blame them. So it is beginning to feel like either we finally get this right and do it the right way, or we're just never going to do it. And this also sends a message to the rest of the country that this is something that even New York, with its wonderful mass transit system and most people taking mass transit, if New York can't do it, how can other cities do this? So what went wrong here? It depends how much time you have. I mean, we can start in the beginning, in 2019, the beginning of this plan to implement congestion pricing. The first problem was that the legislature never voted on it as a standalone bill. Governor Cuomo at the time stuffed it into the state budget. You may say, doesn't matter how the sausage is made, at least we have congestion pricing law, this is the only way we're going to get it, we'll go with that. The problem is, though, that lawmakers never had to vote specifically and explicitly, yes, I am
So
in
they never
favor-
took a stand
Right.
themselves.
They never had to say, I'm in favor of congestion pricing. I want it to start on X date. And yes, I will go to my constituents and say, yes, I voted for X amount of toll to start in 2022, 2023, 2024. Instead, Cuomo designed this bill so that congestion pricing had a date that it couldn't start before. It couldn't start before 2021. But it had no deadline. It could start anywhere between 2021 and forever. So there was a vague direction to create a congestion pricing someday in the future. Future is a long time. And there were no specific details in the bill. Legislatures didn't want to be responsible for $15 toll, $10 toll, $20 toll. They left all of those details up to the MTA. Even the MTA then delegated those details to a separate commission. So there has been a lack of political accountability and political championship on this from the start 5 years ago. A controversial program needs a political champion, and this project has had no political champion at least since Cuomo left, but arguably even Cuomo wasn't championing it all that hard. So very hard to get it done without one politically accountable person saying, hey, I want to do this, even if it's unpopular, this is why I want to do it, and we're going to do it on this day, on this schedule. Never had something like that. Governor Hochul inherited it, as Dana was telling you earlier. She's had mixed feelings about this for a long time and ultimately decided she doesn't want to go ahead with it right now.
Was postponing it, if it has been postponed, a political decision?
It's a political decision. All decisions politicians make are political decisions. This is certainly not the right way to go about pausing it or canceling it. She has had a long time to make this decision. She could have decided to do this a year ago and say, before the MTA goes about setting out the specific toll, saying we're going to charge you $15 starting June 30th, she should have said, if she had these concerns a long time ago, this isn't the right time, or this isn't the right program, let's rethink this. Instead, she had them go through this huge process of public hearings where people devoted their time to speaking, waiting for hours to make their comments, and then unpress the button at the last minute. So this wasn't the right way to go about it, but she's not wrong to be concerned about the economic implications at this moment. That yes, driving to Manhattan has recovered to 100%, a little bit above 100% of normal. Transit ridership, by contrast, is only at 3/4 or less of the pre-COVID normal. So do you want people driving in to stop coming to Manhattan altogether? That's a risk that didn't exist when they enacted the law back in 2019. She could have ameliorated that in different ways. Start with a peak hour only toll that you're only charging people 7 a.m. to noon. Start with a lower toll. Why not start with $5 or $7 rather than $15 billion? But she didn't address these things and then panicked at the last minute and paused the program very suddenly.
Is it dead?
It doesn't have to be dead, but again, just like Romeo and Juliet or Titanic, decisions people have to make.
They were dead.
Right. You can be looking at the screen and telling them what to do, but they don't do it. So a lot of people are falling into what seems like a trap that is fated for them. For example, transit advocates who worked hard for decades pushing this program, understandably are very upset that Hochul, I wouldn't go so far to say that she lied to them, but she was misleading and standing with them at rallies up until just a couple months ago saying we're going to go ahead with this. As Dana told you, she already had misgivings about this, already talking to business leaders. So she didn't treat them very well. But now they're out there protesting and making a crisis environment, saying we have to do this right now, it's a massive crisis. The public does not support this. There is no immediate crisis for the MTA's capital plan. There is plenty of time to take our time and do this right. So what does a post-COVID congestion pricing program look like? Shouldn't be 24 hours a day, peak hour toll only. Give people credits so they can use those congestion pricing tolls that they've paid to get on the mass transit system, see if the mass transit system works for them. Different ways of going about this. But if they're out there saying she's a horrible person and she's responsible for traffic deaths and filthy air and all kinds of stuff, the public is going to see her as the sane one and everybody else as the unhinged parties. This is not the way to go about trying to build support for this program.
So if it certainly is reasonable to assume this adds to cynicism about government, is there a constituency and is there a political will to do the kind of things that you're talking about to reach a much more constructive version of congestion pricing? As you say, the cordon toll, the flat $15 24-hour day, probably from a economic efficiency traffic standpoint, doesn't make sense anymore anyway.
Right, a cordon toll where you have 60th Street as that cutoff, where anyone coming north of 60th Street, once they cross that line, they have to pay the $15. And the same if you're coming from New Jersey, if you're coming from Brooklyn and Queens, once you go over an invisible line, you've got to pay that $15. That is an obsolete technology. London did it 21 years ago because we didn't have ways of charging people per mile traveled. Now we do. Now you could get over that hurdle that it's obsolete if everything else were working well, but it's not working well. So you take something that's either on or off and you say it's $15 no matter what. So I could be driving a van and drive around Manhattan all day making pickups and drop-offs and pay the same $15 as someone who just comes off the West Side Highway at 8 p.m. and drives 2 blocks to my house and parks in a paid garage. Those two drivers are not creating the same level of traffic. Separate issues for taxi cabs, Ubers, a lot of complexities, and the complexities were not dealt with in a manner where you can say, yes, we can turn this on for $15. Why they didn't just say, we're going to start just doing the morning peak hours, charge people in the morning peak hours and see if they change their driving behavior. And if that doesn't work, we'll try something else. But to go from nothing to a $15 toll 16 hours a day, and then a 4-hour toll in the overnight hours that you can't avoid, even in hours of the overnight where there is no mass transit, it was not the way to build public and political support. London's program is a daytime-only program. It's 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. That's it. And as they were recovering from the pandemic, they actually got rid of the evening shoulder hour toll because they wanted their nightlife to recover. So we haven't been very flexible. I mean, the other issues are this would have added more traffic to the Bronx. Congestion pricing advocates tried to minimize that for a long time until they couldn't minimize it anymore. Only partial mitigation of that issue. A lot of issues here that could be overcome by a political champion who stands strongly behind it, but we don't have that right now.
And if they couldn't do a simple version, how are they going to do a complex version? One quick last question. Movement, your forthcoming book, when you started it in 2018, it was going to be a victory lap, as you called it. Not anymore.
Right, things change. I mean, when I proposed the book, New York had record number of residents, record number of tourists, record number of people using the mass transit system, record low crime on the mass transit system, where there was only 1 or 2 homicides a year for record high ridership. Not the same situation today, where we're still trying to rebuild mass transit ridership. The level of random homicides on the transit system has quadrupled or quintupled when you account for the lower ridership. People have taken some refuge in cars, first because they were afraid of COVID, now because they're afraid of deteriorating public safety in dense public spaces. A lot of issues to overcome, but the bottom line is New York is never going to be a car-based city. We can only recover by getting more people into transit, but they have to want to be in transit. You cannot force people to take a transit system that they don't want to take. We learned this lesson in the 70s and 80s. We rebuilt the transit system and made it safer and got graffiti off the trains. We made people want to go back to mass transit. We have to do that again. We can't coerce them.
Nicole Gelinas of the Manhattan Institute and her opinion essay in the New York Times. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up next, I'll have some thoughts on subway crime. Early in 1979, a courtly New Yorker named Morty Matz perpetrated a one-man subway crime wave in New York and got away with it. The transit police not only knew his identity and where to find him, they employed him. He was the union's press agent. Savvy reporters discovered that the only statistical rise was riders' fear, not felonies. But they badgered Mayor Koch to do something. To quell the panic, he assigned a cop to every train and platform at night. His response boosted overtime pay for transit cops and salaries for hiring more police who paid union dues. The cost, $10 million. Pat Moynihan used to say, everyone is entitled to his own opinion, but not to his own facts. The facts about subway crime have always been fungible. Now researchers for the journal Vital City have tried to quantify it. And here's what they found. Since 2019, the number of serious crimes on the subway has increased somewhat. But since ridership has dropped, the number of crimes per ride has risen more, by 40%. Still, last year, there was one reported violent crime for every 280,000 rides. Now, let's look at crimes you may have personally witnessed or heard about. Say you take the subway 10 times a week. You see 20 riders on each trip. You know another 30 with similar schedules. You still have a low probability, about 1 in 500, of being a victim of a reported violent crime yourself over an entire year. But you have a 1 in 30 chance of witnessing a violent crime on the subway during the year. And there's about a 2/3 chance that someone you know will have seen one or experienced one. The disproportionate media attention and the political response, the proliferation of homeless and mentally ill, feed the fear. The Vital City Journal suggests another explanation stemming from the pandemic, when many regular riders worked from home. Quote, "It's possible that some New Yorkers have grown more fearful in the interluding years," the researchers say, having forgotten what it's like to live amidst the persistent need for social cooperation. For the New York Times and CUNY-TV, I'm Sam Roberts.